As this video contains information and instruction on procedures to be adopted, if you're not completely sure of the meaning of what you've seen and heard, we suggest that you run back the video and watch again. Worldwide, ships are carrying packaged, dangerous goods in safety as a matter of routine. But without good seamanship and proper attention being paid to procedures and advice found in the new International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code, the amended IMDG Code, and related national regulations, things might be very different. Even so, just occasionally the unexpected happens, such as this. Fortunately, not a real incident, but an emergency drill on a ro-ro ship, an essential part of an overall plan to ensure that a real incident can be effectively contained and controlled. We could well look closer at the actions we've just seen, starting with the report that a leak has been discovered. The stowage plan shows it to be sulfuric acid. Rapid reference to the dangerous goods list identifies it exactly. Sulfuric acid, more than 51%, UN number 1830. The alarm is raised, and the crew muster. Meanwhile, information about how to deal with the incident is found in the schedule of the emergency procedures for ships carrying dangerous goods. This may be from the booklet or from the supplement, which carries the same information. Reference to the general index of the IMDG code under sulfuric acid, over 51%, shows the appropriate emergency schedule, EMS number, that is the emergency procedures for ships carrying dangerous goods number, to be 806. Under emergency procedures, it says, wear protective clothing and self-contained breathing apparatus when dealing with spillage or fire, and under remarks, it reads, turn ship off wind. Emergency action for on-deck spillage is given as use of water on substance may cause violent reaction. Wash overboard with copious quantities of water from as far away as practicable. This simple experiment shows why copious quantities of water are needed. Sulfuric acid in high concentrations has a strong affinity for water. Heat is generated when they come together. Also, when water is added in small quantities, the acid will attack metal. But large quantities of water will overcome these effects. In this exercise, good planning, a well-drilled team, coupled with the identification of the risk and location of the incident, enable prompt and correct action to be taken. In short, expecting the unexpected in practice. The safe handling and transport of dangerous goods by sea is part of the chain of links designed to minimize the potential risks in carrying hazardous cargoes. A chain which involves the correct identification, classification, marking and labeling, declaration, packing and handling of each consignment, as recommended in the IMDG code. This gives practical advice to assist compliance with the International Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, and Prevention of Pollution from Ships, MARPOL, conventions. Road and rail transport have their own codes and regulations, but these do not cover the wider, more demanding conditions of sea transport accounted for in the IMDG code and the schedules of emergency procedures for ships carrying dangerous goods, both of which have been drawn up by the International Maritime Organization. The code contains comprehensive information about the large number of dangerous goods that might be carried in any trade, deep sea or short haul, often in quite large consignments, made up of a variety of products of different properties and characteristics. The emergency schedules give ship's personnel a rapid means of identifying the recommended emergency procedures and the action to be taken in any ship for almost any substance in the event of an incident. Like this, for instance, a simulated fire in the hold with some drums of hazardous material involved. Again, although only part of a training exercise ashore, the advice needed to deal with an incident like this and others can be found in the emergency schedule. The particular actions to deal with an incident, however, would be dependent on the circumstances at the time, bearing in mind the ship concerned, the equipment available, the types and quantity of cargo involved, and the proximity and nature of other cargoes. Some shipping companies lay down procedures to deal with incidents which apply to particular ships. These, of course, should be followed. But there are some overall principles which apply to all situations. Fatal delay could result if information about the goods is not available, or if proper pre-planning had not been undertaken and carefully thought through. First, therefore, it's necessary to know in general terms what the hazards presented by dangerous goods are. Broadly, these fall into three main headings. Flammable. The flash point of a flammable liquid is the lowest temperature of the liquid at which its vapor forms an ignitable mixture with air. Flashpoint figures are given in the IMDG code, but they should also be included on the dangerous goods declaration for each consignment. Toxic. There are an enormous number of substances which are toxic, that is, poisonous. They may be solid, liquid, or gas. Corrosive substances cover a wide range of products, such as hydrochloric acid and sulfuric acid, caustic soda, and so on. In addition, there are many substances which react with other substances that may or may not be relatively harmless in themselves, but which, when in contact, can react dangerously. For example, concentrated sulfuric acid may react with organic materials. With sugar, for instance, the remarkable result is this: within minutes. Other examples of reactive substances include many organic peroxides, some of which may explode if involved in fire or in contact with strong acid. The second principle is the need for careful pre-planning, which includes assessment of the risks, careful loading and stowage, and should include assessment of the risks on any particular voyage. This brings us back to the dangerous goods declaration and other documentation accompanying the cargo, and to the stowage and emergency plans. This is the first stage in pre-planning, identifying potential hazards and precautions and procedures needed should any dangerous goods become involved in an incident. This assessment can be made by referring to IMO publications such as the IMDG code, which includes the emergency procedures for ships carrying dangerous goods, and the medical first aid guide for use in accidents involving dangerous goods, all of which are included in the new IMDG code supplement. Any national regulations should also be referred to. If there's still any doubt, information should be sought by radio from the ship's operators, who can contact other shore sources of highly specialized information and advice. The third principle of pre-planning is to be familiar with equipment and resources available. Everybody must know the whereabouts of emergency equipment, including protective clothing and breathing apparatus. All the equipment must be maintained in good working order. Finally, everyone must be familiar with their duties. Drills of the action to be taken in the event of incidents involving dangerous goods should be part of the normal emergency response organization on board, and are of benefit in exercising members of the emergency response team in their duties, and in testing the procedures and overall emergency response organization. Pre-planning is intended to assist those concerned to respond correctly and reach decisions quickly should an incident occur. As mentioned already, the actions required at the time will depend on the prevailing circumstances and conditions. But again, for any emergency plan, there are certain guidelines to be followed. The first step is to identify the goods directly involved and others near the incident which may become affected. Based on a knowledge of the properties of the substances involved, the circumstances on board, and with the advice from the code and EMS schedules, judgments can be made about how to tackle the situation. For instance, what protective clothing is needed? What equipment should be used? Does ventilation need to be controlled? Are any protective measures necessary for the crew not involved in tackling the incident? And so on. The answers to these questions and other information required are contained in the EMS schedule and the IMDG code, or may already have been ascertained as part of the pre-planning process. So to recap, the emergency plan should be to identify, to decide, to execute, and to monitor the progress of the incident, and later to review why it happened in the first place and what measures can be taken to prevent the recurrence of such an incident. The use of water needs special mention, since although it is the most readily available means for controlling incidents, there are a few cases where water may have undesirable side effects. For instance, will the free surface effect of large amounts of water affect the stability of the ship? Will it have an adverse action on the goods involved? Here, we see the effect of water on metallic potassium, which produced hydrogen and heat. The same effect is seen with metallic sodium. Advice on whether and how water should be used is given in the EMS schedule. In cases involving fire in other cargo, large quantities of water may still have to be applied. While these general principles hold true for the majority of incidents, there are some dangerous goods classes which need special mention. For example, Class 1, explosives. Because of the stable nature of most explosives and the very strict regulations controlling their declaration, packing and handling, these substances are rarely the direct cause of incidents. They're usually loaded at special berths or anchorages under strict supervision. Where fire is involved or is threatening a consignment of explosives, the emergency schedules for Class 1 and the introduction to this class in the IMDG code give advice on protection of the consignment. This usually means constant cooling with water. Guidance is also given on the likelihood and possible size of any explosion that may occur due to the heat from the fire. Radioactive materials of Class 7 also require special mention, as they're often the cause of unnecessary anxiety. A common misconception is that radiation from radioactive material causes other substances to become radioactive. This is not so, and treated sensibly and in accordance with the regulations, radioactives will give no trouble, even if involved in fire, when the best immediate action in general is to keep the package cool if possible. The IMO's Emergency Procedures, EMS, for dangerous goods gives specific advice on the measures to be taken if a package of Class 7 material is damaged or involved in an incident. Needless to say, however, radioactives, like all dangerous goods, must be handled with care. But safety is assured by adhering to the required packagings, which are specially designed to take into account the potential risk from the radioactive material. They must limit the loss or dispersal of the contents and retain their shielding both under normal transport conditions and in very severe accidents. Here we see the packing of a small particle of radioactive material contained in a tiny sealed stainless steel capsule, a few millimeters in length. The operation takes place in a very heavily shielded and enclosed cell, and outside, the operator wears protective clothing and gear. The little capsule is placed in a small cylinder and then inserted into a heavily shielded lead pot. Dependent on the radioactive contents, some materials are transported in the type of package known as Type B. The package is completed by placing the pot in the firmly insulated receptacle and closing the lid. A Geiger counter measures the small amount of radiation that might be present. There will be very low levels present whilst in transport, but these are not dangerous to anyone coming into contact with them for short periods of time. For example, whilst handling the container on board ship. Properly stowed and segregated in accordance with the IMDG code, there will be no danger to persons, even on the longest voyages. There are a few more general points about other classes of goods. Gases, many of which are invisible and are usually heavier than air, might cause further complications if the handling and stowage requirements have not been strictly observed. For instance, gas may leak from a cylinder and find its way into accommodation via hatchways or through an open door. Unusual smells should never be ignored, and the suspicion of a leak should be reported immediately. Where gas cylinders are involved, special care needs to be taken to know about all the hazards of the substances contained, and precautions to be taken if the cylinder is leaking or involved in a fire. If on fire, provided no other danger exists in the vicinity, it may be as well to let them burn themselves out rather than to try and extinguish the flame immediately and allow the leaking gas to become a hazard. Corrosive liquids. Water spray from a safe distance should be used on spillages of corrosive liquids, even though the substance may react with water. Powerful jets should not be used, as these are likely to cause splashing, which may spread the corrosive perhaps onto the emergency team. Nevertheless, copious quantities of water must be used, but only in spray form. If anyone receives burns from fire or from contact with chemicals, or has been exposed to toxic fumes, proper first aid treatment must be given promptly. This is dealt with very thoroughly in the IMO Medical First Aid Guide for use in accidents involving dangerous goods, the MFAG for short, being the chemical supplement to the International Medical Guide for Ships, IMGS, giving the treatment for exposure to a vast number of substances, although additional medical advice by radio may also be needed. The information is obtained by cross-references in the general and numerical indexes to the IMDG code. Further medical advice should be sought later if necessary, and the patient will have to see a doctor at the next port of call. But first aid treatment may often save life or prevent long illness. After an incident, decontamination of clothing should not be overlooked. With all dangerous goods, pollution at sea must be considered, especially if the incident takes place not far from shore. But the safety of the crew and the ship must come first. In any case, the shore authorities should be notified if any chemicals are lost overboard or have to be jettisoned for safety reasons. And for marine pollutants carried in packaged form, which must carry the mark required by the IMDG code, there is a specific obligation to make such a report. Properly identified and declared cargo, correctly stowed, segregated and secured, and care taken in checking the condition of the package during loading, and where possible throughout the voyage, will go a long way to ensure a safe and uneventful trip. But don't be complacent. Don't assume that because incidents involving dangerous goods at sea are rare, that things can't go wrong, which means be aware of the properties and characteristics of the cargoes carried. Have a plan of action ready. Be familiar with the safety and emergency resources and equipment available. Ensure that everyone knows their duties in the event of an incident. Be vigilant. Report any suspected incidents immediately and correctly identify the hazards. Recognize that a potential danger, however unlikely, does exist. That way, in the interests of yourself, the crew, and the ship herself, you will be constantly prepared, and so much safer, by simply expecting the unexpected.